Welcome to the Painting Coach, and in this video we're doing something a little bit special. Get it? We're painting dwarfs. Little. Yeah, I know. There is, however, one major issue when it comes to painting these dwarfs, and that is that I don't have any dwarfs. Luckily, this video's sponsor, Uniformation, stepped in with just the tool I needed. Now, if you've not heard of Uniformation before, I hadn't either really, but I do know that the go-to person for 3D printing in our industry is Ross from Fohammer, and he had this to say.
I put this printer as the #1 pick for best 3D printer for miniatures up on fohammer.com immediately.
So with such a ringing endorsement, I said yes to the 3D printer, and Uniformation also very kindly sent me their cure station and wash station as well, and I'm going to show you how they all work and how we're going to print these dwarfs. Now, even though Uniformation have sent me all of this equipment for free, there's absolutely no obligation on me to say or do anything. This is a completely unbiased review, and I've not been given any script or any instructions on features to talk about. So whilst I've got the kit, I also need some files to print. Now, looking around the internet on some forums, Highlands Miniatures have come very highly recommended, so let's check them out on my mini factory. These models look absolutely great, and I've got real Total War Warhammer vibes going on here. So let's pick up some files. I went for the Warriors, I went for the Prince, I also went for the Veterans. So before I talk even more about the printer and show you the painting, let's look at the models. Now, these have come off the printer. I've washed and cured them. I'll talk all about that as we get through the video, but these look absolutely fantastic. The detail is nice and crisp. There's a little bit of cleanup to do, but otherwise they're generally okay. You can see on this captain that unfortunately his beard is a little malformed, and I have a suspicion as to why. It's not a problem with the printer, it's the supports I used. If I go back to the ones that have used the thicker supports, there's absolutely no issue in terms of the print quality. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through this. So let's show you how we get them from our computer onto the 3D printer. The slicer I'm using is Chitterbox. This comes bundled with the GK2 at the time of publishing this video. So all you need to do is log into Chitterbox and then find your file. So if I just select all of these Dwarven Warrior files, you can see that they will start to load up and then will be automatically placed on the build plate. Now you set the settings of Chitterbox to match your printer, and it's got loads of different presets, and the GK2 is one of them. So if we just zoom in, we can have a little look, and we can see that all these warriors are ready to go. All these little supports are what's going to help the miniatures paint successfully on the printer. You see there's an unsupported file, so we don't need that one. And you can also see at the back here, we've got some red. Now that means they're not quite on the build plate. So what we want to do is we want to spread them all out as much as we possibly can. Now I'm conscious that there's no weapons on here. And in terms of the print time, what we'll do is click slice. This will then load through and tell us how long it's going to take, but also how much resin it's going to use based on the printer settings. Now I'm printing at a 0.05mm layer height. And you can see here that this is going to take about 3 hours and 17 minutes. So not a huge amount of time. That's because regardless of how much you've got on the build plate, it depends on how high you need to print. So to illustrate this, watch this now. If I click back and I take out this spear because that's the tallest thing on here, and then I reslice this, it'll go through the process again and it'll demonstrate to you actually we can print all those dwarfs and it's going to take a much quicker amount of time. So it's now only 2 hours and 17 minutes. We've saved nearly an hour by taking our spear off. So all we do now is save this to a USB, we stick it in the printer, and we're away to go. It's just important that you make sure you don't overload your build plate, because that'll increase the suction underneath, behave, and that'll cause print failures. So in true Painting Coach fashion, it seems at the moment, I've lost a little bit of footage from the start, which showed me printing the dwarf. So I've just got some other models on the printer, and you can see how it goes in and out of the vat. And the UV light basically cures the lowest layer of resin and it builds up layer on layer. While that works, let me tell you a little bit about the printer and some of the features that make this really great. You've got a 5-inch touchscreen, which is really intuitive. You've got really easy clamping structures, which make taking the build plate off really easy. And the pièce de résistance is the thermostat system, which warms the resin, and this massively reduces the chance of failure. There's also a built-in air filter which pulls out the majority of those nasties associated with resin printing. There is of course the 8K screen with a 7680 by 4320 pixel resolution. This means your minis come out crisp. So here's my first batch of dwarfs. You can see they look like this as they come out of the printer. There's a little bit of excess resin on them, so you can't quite see the detail. But I'll talk you through the post-processing now so you can get a feel for what this is like. First thing to do is to scrape the models off this into a pot of alcohol. So it's isopropyl, it's 99%. And this is a plastic pickle jar, and that strainer is really handy, as you'll see in a minute. The strainer makes it really easy to wash off all of the excess resin without getting our hands dirty, because don't forget, this can be quite hazardous, so that's why I've also got gloves on, and I'm also using a respirator mask as well, so I don't inhale too many fumes. Now, Uniformation also sent me their wash station, and you can see here that this slot is quite curiously shaped, and it's shaped like this because the build plate actually fits inside, so you could, if you wanted to, take the build plate out of the printer straight into the wash machine. Now, I've chosen not to do that because I don't think it washes quite as well as it does, because there's so much excess resin on there. So for me, I like to use the basket, and that's just as simple as tipping them out of the pickle jar into the basket and then popping this into the alcohol and pressing the play button for a good 10-minute wash. Once those 10 minutes are up, you can see that the models are much cleaner and the detail is much more pronounced. Don't worry, I will show you the models before I put any paint on them as well once they're finally built. But you can see here I'm pulling away the supports, and because of the way these supports are engineered, they come off quite easily. Now, I am noticing a few failures in the print and some imperfections. I think that's because I went for the option of using thin supports. So if I do reprint anything, I'm probably going to use the slightly thicker supports, and that just means that they're more likely to print properly. Uniformation also sent me their curing box, and this is the final step in post-processing, apart from any cleanup. So what we need to do is pop the models in there. We'll put them in for about 5 minutes, and this will harden the resin on the outside. So whilst the UV in the machine does cure them into the shape you need, you do need to put a final cure on. And this box is great because it's got light coming from above, left, right, and below. So they get a really good cure after only 5 minutes. Now, whenever you're using super glue, it's really good to use an activator. This is the one I'm using. A big shout out to Mikey from Hellstorm Gaming for putting this on my radar. It works fantastically well. You just spray it, let it evaporate, then you super glue your models. Now, the movement tray I've got here is magnetized, and I've also got magnets on the bottom of the bases, which makes it really easy to just line up my dwarfs. And there we are, happy days. So now I've managed to glue them all together. We can see what they look like. So I'm really, really happy with the quality on these. I'm really looking forward to giving them a good paint job as well. Like I said, we're going to go for a quick paint job. That doesn't mean it's going to be a bad paint job. In terms of scale, you can see that they're about half the size of a Space Marine. But in terms of a Bretonian Archer, they're a little bit big. So I think it's a 32mm rather than 28mm. But that's just going to make them easy to paint, and I really, really like them. I'm definitely going to get some more of these Highlands Dwarfs. I want to paint these dwarfs really quickly, so I'm going to use speed paint from the Army Painter, and I'm going to use the slap chop method. So firstly, I've primed the models in black. I'm then going to use my airbrush to go over with a lighter grey, focusing on the areas that are going to catch the most light, just to give me a smooth transition. You can do this with a dry brush if you haven't got an airbrush. The last bit of prep, I'm going to take some white paint and dry brush this over the sharpest edges, just to get a nice crisp highlight. If I do go a little bit too stark, I can always blend it back with a little bit of grey underneath as well. Now it's time to paint. I'm starting off by just getting a feel for how this is going to look. So I'm just using some Beowulf blue on the standard bearer because I think that's a really nice colour. And as this starts to dry, it really does start to stick out quite nicely. I really quite like this. I'm going to work my way through some of the other colours, just picking some random ones like burnished red. And for the purple, I'm going to go for Hive Dweller purple, which is a kind of nice dark purple. And again, once this dries, it looks fairly nice. And the thing I've noticed about all the clothing as it dries is it all looks fairly desaturated, which wasn't necessarily the look I was going for, but I actually quite like for dwarven cloth. Doing all the skin, I just used peachy flesh for most of the dwarfs, and this is a very simple step of just painting over the skin. Obviously being a little careful around the beards, because if we do make any mistakes, we're going to have to go in and repaint. For the unit champion, I used Crusader flesh, which is a slightly different colour, and just makes him look that little bit older. It kind of gives you more of a desaturated, aged look, I think. The key with this is not letting it pool too much on the top of his head. Moving on to the boots, I just used Grim Black on all of them, leaving that metal strip across the top, because we are going to use the speed paint metallics on these as well, just to get through them as quick as we can. I'm going to paint all the weapon grips with Moody Mauve, which is a really nice colour. If you think about how we paint these normally, we use things like Screamer Pink and Pink Horror. The Moody Mauve does this in one hit. Okay, it's not as good looking, in my opinion, but it does give you a nice effect. For all the wood elements, such as the handle on the axes and also the inside of the shields and that big banner pole, I'm going to use dark wood. It does exactly what it says on the tin. And I really like how this gives you a little bit of a, well, not a blotchy appearance, but certainly an appearance that when it dries, you do get some nice highlights. And it is a very nice colour to use. So it does look effective. For the leather, I'm going to use two colours. I'm going to use hardened leather and satchel brown. Again, this is experimenting, seeing which ones look pretty decent, and then just alternating between the different models. Where I've got a dark colour on the tabard, I'm going to go with the lighter hardened leather. On the lighter colour tabards, I'm going to go with the darker satchel brown. To tie the models together into some sort of unit, I'm going to use the colour red. So I'm using blood red, and all I'm going to do is paint this over all of the shields, and I'm also going to paint it over the banner as well. Now, I am being careful not to spill it over onto the edges that are going to be metal later on. And you can really see, particularly on the shields and the banner, that as this goes into the recesses, you get a really nice transition between the darker and the lighter bits of red for little to no effort, really. On to the metallics then. So if you need to go in and tidy up any areas, but the first thing we're going to do is paint the silver. And the colour I'm going to use is polished silver, which is the brightest of the speed paint metallics. And the reason for that is because I want to just get it over that undercoat and see how it comes out. So all the silver areas, we're looking at the chainmail, any armour, we're looking at the helmets, the axe heads. We've got the straps across the feet as well. So just take your time and add in whichever bits you think would benefit from being this bright silver colour. I used Taos Bronze for the wrist vambraces. Again, just to add a different colour on there. I also used this on the horn. This wasn't my favourite colour to use, but actually it came out looking okay on the models. For the gold, I used Glittering Loot, which again is the brightest gold colour. I just painted everything I wanted to be gold, such as belt buckles and medallion, the rims of the shield, some of the runes, the nice work around the helmets as well, just to break them up from the silver. This went on really nicely, and I think the thing that's jumping out to me about the metallics is they do need a bit of shading as well, because they don't quite give you that the way the normal speed paints do. Finished off painting the dwarf beards. Now, of course, we can't have dwarves without some nice orange beards. So the colour I used for this was Fire Giant Orange. I also used some Grim Black on one of them and some Gravelord Grey as well to give some nice grey beards, which I think looks pretty effective. And that's all the painting done on these. It didn't take me that long at all, probably a couple of hours across the rest of them, so you can get a regiment done pretty quickly, I think. Now, I'd certainly go back in, and you can always add highlights later on if you want and shading later on, but as a base to get an army down on the table to play, I'm really happy with how quick this was, and the look is pretty decent as well. It's not going to win you a painting competition, but you know exactly where they are on the table, and you can see that they all tie together nicely as well. And these miniatures, really do like them too. So, would I recommend the Uniformation GK2 to you? It entirely depends. In terms of the quality and the print crispness, it's fantastic. Setup, really good. The heater is fantastic, and like I said, helps you print in any weather. So I would say I recommend it. However, it's really important that you understand that when you print with resin, it's not just a case of buying a printer. You do need the post-processing elements as well, and you also need the space for it. Now, we do have to talk about the elephant in the room, and that is the price. The price of the printer is a little bit more than the other kind of printers that you can get on the market that may give you an equivalent print quality. The only thing I can say for that is to figure out what works for you, because with the heater in the vat, you're going to get more success and less failures, which means you're going to use less resin and you're going to waste less time. So that can be an important factor for some people. You can also get your pens and calculators out to figure out if actually printing an army is going to cost you less than actually buying one. I think in the long term it will. It's just that initial investment that means you're going to pay a little bit more up front, but as you use it more and more, over time, it'll start to pay for itself. So would I recommend the Uniformation GK2 to anyone? Yes and no. Yes, if you want to get into 3D printing, you want to improve your painting by having limitless supplies of things like busts. Resin 3D printing can be hazardous, and is a little bit messy. So also just bear that in mind. So there we go. That is the Uniformation GK2 printing out some dwarves by Highlands Miniatures. I've painted them really, really quickly as well. That's why the thumbnail said fast for a dwarf. I'm not the dwarf. They're the dwarfs. So I really hope you enjoyed this video, looking at a bit of kit that can help you expand your hobby. I really enjoyed using the machine. A couple of hiccups, but nothing unsurmountable. Thank you so much for watching. Check out my other content here. I'll see you next time.